12 News is your local election headquarters. Now we continue our Where They Stand series on WPRI.com. I'm Ray Bakari. Joining us today is Ken Block, who is known as a government watchdog here in Rhode Island. And this edition is going to focus on question one in the ballot in Rhode Island, which asks voters, should there be a constitutional convention, also known as CON for short? We're going to have both a for and against perspective on this question to give both sides of the issue, and Ken will be representing the for side. And this question comes up every 10 years, typically the year that ends in the number 4. Ken, it's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
So for those who don't know what a constitutional convention is, because the last time those voted on was 2014, how would you explain it to them?
It's really quite simple. The Constitutional Convention is a mechanism where 75 individuals are elected to the convention, just like we elect our state representatives, and they consider changes that need to or could be made to our Constitution. The convention has to vote by majority approval on each proposal. Those proposals that are approved by the convention are then individually submitted to the voters in the next general election for the voters to approve or disapprove each one of them, and the ones that get approved cause a change to be made to the Constitution of Rhode Island.
And what are some changes, either good or bad, that could be seen if this question is approved by voters?
So the purpose of the convention is to make necessary changes to the Constitution. As time changes, the Constitution needs to change. It's a living document. Or you might make changes to the Constitution because for political reasons you can't get some things done that are needed to be done through legislation in the state. And that's where I think the convention is most important. It took 50 years for advocates to get the legislature to remove the master lever from Rhode Island law because the legislature didn't want to give up the electoral advantage that the master lever provided to them. Similarly, the legislature doesn't want to provide a governor's line item veto to Rhode Island's governor. 44 other states have it. Rhode Island needs it. We don't have a check and balance on our budget process, but there's no speaker that we're ever going to see here in Rhode Island that would make a governor's line item veto pass through the legislature so the voters could approve it. I think that anybody here who is upset about the Washington Bridge, and that's probably almost everybody, the way that problem has festered, the unresponsiveness of the governor's office, of the Department of Transportation, the lack of transparency, all of that can be addressed through the office of an inspector general. It really is an important position to have in our government. There's no chance that the legislature will even consider it. And again, something that I think a constitutional convention can and should deliver as a proposal for the population of Rhode Island to vote upon.
And just to get the other side of this so I can get your response to it, sometimes when critics are asked about the Constitutional Convention, they'll say, oh, this could open up Pandora's box to get rid of LGBTQ plus rights or roll back on the reproductive rights progress that the state has made. What would your response be to those criticisms?
It's bunk, because the Constitutional Convention doesn't get rid of anything. The voters in a general election are the ones who would approve or disapprove of it. And what we've seen in polling is that there's no appetite on the part of Rhode Island's electorate to remove any rights in the LGBTQ community. And abortion now is a huge winner in the poll, right? Pro-choice is an issue that polls above 70%. So no proposal is likely to come out of a constitutional convention that would attack abortion rights. But for sure, the voters in this state are not going to do a complete 180 and decide to approve the removal of those rights when they're so clearly in support of those rights.
Now this, as I mentioned at the top of the interview, this is on the ballot every 10 years. The last couple times it's been on the ballot were 2014, 94, those two times, in 2004 I should say. All those got rejected. What are your expectations for the question's result this time around?
It's really hard to know. A lot depends on the mood of the electorate. It depends on whether there's any kind of an organized effort to convince voters to vote for it. I look at the bridge as all the reason that you need to approve the Constitutional Convention. There's one big point that the anti-convention folks bring up that I find really amazing and laughable, and that's that in 1986, their perception of that constitutional convention, which was 40 years ago, right? 2 full generations in the past. And they're worried that that constitutional convention got out over their skis a little bit, approved some things that scares these folks today. But that was 40 years ago. It was a different time. There was a different demographic in place than what we have right now. And even if the convention does do something unexpected, it's extremely unlikely that the voting population of this state would approve something along the lines of what the advocates against the convention are worried about. So in my opinion, most of the people who are against the Constitutional Convention represent status quo politics in this state. Many of them are special interests, and special interests are terrified of a Constitutional Convention because that convention could upset their apple cart in terms of the control that they exert over our elected officials. Right, that's why labor is very much against a constitutional convention, et cetera, et cetera. It's really necessary. It's the only mechanism that we have available to us to get things done that the speaker doesn't want to get done. And the speaker, by definition, is self-interested. He is most worried about his individual or her individual power and the legislature's power, as opposed to what's right for Rhode Island. And the way to fix that imbalance is to fix it through a constitutional convention.
For my last question, I want to look a little bit ahead in the event that this does get approved. And you kind of touched upon in the last 2 answers talking about the process, because this question just asked if it should be held, and then to my understanding, the convention would be sometime in 2026. And then you also talked about the questions themselves would then be presented to voters after whatever comes out of it. So for someone watching at home, if this gets approved on November 5th and we find out question 1 is approved, what comes next?
It's a good question. I'm not exactly sure. Somebody somewhere has to organize the convention, has to organize the election to elect the delegates to the convention. You have to provide time for candidates to come forward, for candidates to voice the things that they think are important to address in a convention. And it's certainly my hope that a convention would be narrowly focused on the governmental challenges that we have here, the things that we need to change structurally so that we're not one of the last states in the country. We have a broken mechanism in terms of the balance of power between the governor and the legislature. And there's a couple of different things that we need to do to address it. If we can stick to the process issues like that, it would be a productive and very good outcome for the convention. If it gets all bogged down in the culture war stuff, it will be a very ineffective convention and ultimately won't yield any real changes because Rhode Island voters have made very clear where they stand on the culture war issues, and that's just not going to change.
That's all the questions I had. Ken, I want to thank you for coming for this interview. We really appreciate it.
Great, thank you.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of Where They Stand. Remember, 12 News is your local election headquarters. We have other candidate interviews and local races highlighted on WPRI.com and a full voter guide available as well. For now, Ray Bakari, 12 News.